international writing program has been bringing writers from around the world to the University of Iowa for the last 40 years. And starting last year, we began to go on the road to think of our program as not just something located in Iowa, but as something that seeks to make connections around the world. So we had our first symposium here at this time last year on the subject of what we hold in common. Natural growing out of that, when we were trying to talk about what we hold in common, the idea of the commons that we would then look at something a slightly knottier, thornier subject, which is justice. Justice, one or many.
Έχει σχέση όχι με το παρόν, αλλά έχει σχέση με το μέλλον της ανθρωπότητας.
Mr. Agoussis is particularly pleased about the topic of the second symposium, which is justice, because it is a very crucial topic today, particularly not only for the past and the present, but for the future and the future generation.
Να είστε καλά, σας ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που ήρθατε στο νησί μας. Ευχόμαστε μια πάρα πολύ σημαντική, μια πάρα πολύ δημιουργική συνάντηση να είναι αυτή που θα έχετε αυτές τις ημέρες εδώ πέρα και βεβαίως θα είμαστε στη διάθεσή σας, εμείς και όλο το νησί, να σας προσφέρουμε πάρα πολύ όμορφες ημέρες στην Πάρο. Ευχαριστούμε πάρα πολύ που είσαστε εδώ.
Mr. Agoussis welcomes you and wishes you a pleasant stay and good work.
Να έρχεται ο κόσμος να δώνουμε λίγο ανάπτυξη, δηλαδή στο χωριό και στο προπαδό στη Λέφτης, γιατί η Λέφτης είναι λίγο
Things that such influx as the symposium and other people coming to the island, that the life is enriched and they feel better as part of the greater humanity.
Και πώς το βλέπετε εσείς γενικά αυτό το θέμα της δικαιοσύνης? Σας φαίνεται σημαντικό στις μέρες μας, στην κοινωνία μας?
I think it's one of the most important subjects that you can take time to discuss and to find out the opinions of the people.
Greece is very important in terms of finding it for real, the country that you existed in your imagination, on the map of your imagination, which is so important to you, especially if you know Greek myths, as I do from childhood. And because you can easily, suddenly, all the modern imagery, the European imagery of centuries, they like you know, a Russian doll Matryoshka, they fall in and they are closed into a bigger thing, which is Greece. And I feel and I sense all the roots, how past is woven into presence, how we can feel where we come from, where we start. And I find Greece very important for that. And I don't find it more important than, for example, Rome or Jerusalem or Egypt or any other country which in my mind belongs both to the ancient world and to the modern world simultaneously. But these are very special countries, there are not so many, where you have this importance of modernity and antiquity, which is so important for the way your own mind and your own imagination functions. So, as far as justice is concerned, I found it, reading the essays, I found it extremely, in a way, proving of the point I was trying to make, how we all understand and we talk about the same thing. People from all other different countries, they talk of the same thing and they take the idea of justice basically the same. It's the same idea. The difference comes what's abuse of justice or the difficulty with it comes from the place where they come from. and that is different, understandable, and translatable into any other language and country we're coming from.
Εγώ δόξα Θεώ δεν θέλω να κάνω ούτε άδικο ούτε να μου κάνουν.
Ναι.
Ναι.
Αλλά βλέπετε πότε καμιά αδικία?
Πολύ.
Πολύ.
Ναι. Βλέπω που δεν πάει στο ίσο. Αφού είναι ο δρόμος εδώ ο ίσος, εκείνος πάει, δεν πάει στον ίσο, πάει στον άλλο.
He says that he sees injustice everywhere, and that there are understandable things that people don't follow, like, you know, there is a straight way of going, but people are going the wrong way. He speaks metaphorically, of course, not for drivers.
I think that my colleagues may differ with me, or they may elaborate on what I'm saying here. But it seems to me that at every step that we made in the Middle East, from Aleppo down to Ramallah, we were hearing in one form or another writers, students, professors, government officials talking in one way or another about injustice, a sense of grieving, a sense of things not being fairly dealt with. And so that's part of the stuff that brings us here for the conversation in the old Platonic mode of going around the room and asking one another what we think and trying to elaborate on our arguments, defend our arguments, trying to come at the end of the day to a more complex understanding of the writer's relationship to this thorny subject of justice.
But I feel that the way we change culture and the way we change how we human beings feel it's all right to treat each other is one sentence at a time, one phrase at a time. And those phrases are in my poems and in what I say not in my poems, absolutely equally. But my work is to write, and I hope that poetry does in fact quietly alter the heart, alter the mind, alter our sense of the continuity between not only people, but people in the earth, people and creatures, people and trees. Every time an image appears in a poem, that is an act of becoming porous, an act of becoming vulnerable to something that isn't the self. And I believe so strongly that the root of kindness, of justice, of compassionate behavior is in the surrender of the barricaded self, that I think every poem in a way is an act of peacemaking and an act of opening and vulnerability.
Λοιπόν. Καλά, στην πραγματικότητα δεν νομίζω ότι λειτουργεί ιδιαίτερα. Δηλαδή, περισσότερο το συμφέρον υπάρχει. Και δίκαιο είναι για τον καθένα ό,τι τον εξυπηρετεί.
Yeah, it says that it usually doesn't work very well because each one looks for his own interest and his own benefit or profit, and therefore justice for most of the people essentially means being what serves him better.
Jimmy Kruger, who was the Minister of Police in South Africa, his response to hearing about the death of Stephen Biko was to say, "Dit laat my koud, it leaves me cold," which was then flashed around.
What he said.
It was like, I don't care. I mean, this is of no interest to me. It's the same response as this neo-Nazi. Do you want me to cry? Like, why should I care about this? This actually flashed across newspapers around the world and became an enormous embarrassment for him. And I don't know if he was ever in any way changed by that, but that position became socially unacceptable.
But we expect our ministers and people in the state not to say things like that. We expect our neo-Nazi psychopaths to express that view. In certain ways, they get their power from saying things that are just reprehensible, because they're victimized, everyone says they're bad, and then their group is solidified by that.
to execute justice does not necessarily mean that you undo injustice. It may follow in the wake of injustice, and it may compensate for it, may acknowledge it, but it not necessarily. So the question of death penalty, which is at the heart of Barry Sanders' paper, and which in some ways is the self-imposed death penalty, which is at the heart of the narrative that you have charted out for us, does not necessarily undo the injustice. That is not a symmetrical justice. Justice and injustice don't stand in a symmetrical and inverse relationship, in a covenant relationship to one another. So to get simply to these neo-Nazis and drag them to a kind of a court of public opinion which is going to force them to repent does not exactly solve the problem. Why not? Because we have not come to terms with the framework within which they felt comfortable saying, that leaves me cold, or what do you want me to cry? They spoke to a constituency that does not share the rules of the game at all with Noel Martin or Stephen Biko. And so the question becomes again, how can you have these nested spaces of justice where people perceive not to be even inhabiting the same zone in which the same set of rules apply? And from that arises the next question, which is, what if we do understand from which the place from which his fury arose that led him to kill a person and to say, what do you want me to do? Why?
Compassion is to be applied to both the victims of human rights abuses and those responsible for the offense, with the injunction that we as members of society do everything in our power to change, ameliorate, and end the circumstances that led to this disturbance in the moral balance of our universe. I'll end my comments with a brief fable that arose out of a statement I had heard Desmond Tutu make in a radio interview, that many of the interpreters for the TRC suffered mental anguish and breakdowns from having to speak in the first person for both violator and victim. The fable is called The Interpreter for the Tribunal. I was hiding in my friend's garage, a place no one would think to look. I had my informants, you see. We were boys together, and I knew he'd never betray me. I waited until the time they usually brought him food, and when he opened the door to my whistle, I was on him like a pack of wild dogs. He ground my face into the concrete, shouting horribly in my ear. The pain was terrible. I did not know what was happening. The trick is to disorient the prisoner right away, get him off guard, and he'll tell you anything you want to know. My arm was twisted behind my back, and I could feel the ligaments tearing. I did not struggle, but he kept twisting. His knee, my knee, and his back. You bastard, you're done now, he screamed. I was thrust from the darkness into the light, then into the darkness again like a sack of potatoes. I threw him into the trunk of my car. I'm that strong. I could hear him thumping the trunk as I drove and hit the brakes, taking the corners hard. I bashed my head against something hard and was thrown helplessly into the light of a 2,000 candle-powered torch, right in the eyes, hitting him all the time, the fists coming from nowhere, and I felt a rib breaking, my nose breaking. The blood ran down his face, and he didn't even lift a finger to wipe it off. My glasses had come off when they got me, and I had no idea where I was on the ground of that hut. And yes, I sat on his back and pulled the sack over his head, the wet sack like I was drowning. I could not breathe. He could not breathe. I pulled it off. Now you will tell me what I want to know, because otherwise I could not breathe. I told him everything. It did not take long to get the names. My friends who betrayed me, the friends I did not know what I was saying, what he was saying. Those were hard times, and we had to be hard to live in them. I just wanted the pain to stop, but I have to live with who I am now, who was I then. It is too terrible to speak of it at all is to go mad.
Naked, they stood up. My mothers of Manipur. My eyes are born from their eyes. All that I speak is from them, from their music. Naked, they stood up. My mothers of Manipur. Can the army and the police do anything they like? Nobody is allowed in the streets. Only smoke goes by. Nobody can speak up, nowhere to protest. Naked, they stood up, my mothers of Manipur. Army jeeps move around under the sky. army jeeps sing our national song. There is unbuttoning in one jeep. A girl reeled into the jeep. Should the girl go home? Should the girl die under the sky? The police have erased her name. What's her address? A village outside Imphal? This is what happens every day. A young girl is found unconscious. Somewhere else, her younger sister missing. Only their skirts flutter from trees. But in the month of July, the limit is passed. Naked, they stood up, the breast milk givers. Let the world watch the veins in their chest. How do you feel when you see your own mother naked? As Assam rifles shut down the gates, I feel as I did in the I feel the river Ganga streaming out hot. The mothers of Manipur redefined mothers. Where mothers walk naked in protest? Colonels? Commanders? What did you do? Do you think your mom still remains mom? She's burning. She's burning. Inside every mother, a mother within mother.
A couple of things. One is I was very moved when I read your poem and your essay, and
thank you.
It's very basic presentation of the power of vulnerability in the face of power, and the power of shame, that sometimes cultures can be changed by shame rather than violence. And also I thought about several parallel phenomena. I thought about the mothers of the disappeared in Argentina, who gathered week after week after week in the central square dressed in black, and were joined by more and more and more women who simply stood there silently to say that what could not be spoken of was made visible by the mothers.
Yeah.
So it has been done in different ways. I wonder why it isn't done more.
There's something a certain moral authority mothers have.
Yeah.
If there's a similar gathering in Argentina in the plaza of fathers, or in Manipur, it's much more likely to evoke an aggressive
Well,
response.
what does it mean to bear the testicles rather than to bear the breasts?
Yeah, I think it's really
It's a
interesting.
challenge.
If you were to get a plaza full of men, even if they are silently
Yeah.
protesting, even if they are being nonviolent, the army will come out and shoot them all.
Yeah.
But the army will not come out and shoot mothers. I think it's a question of gender and just the
Yeah.
authority that women have as those who give life.
Germans didn't shy away from killing women or executing women. When they raised several villages, including one in Peloponnese called Calabrita, they shot every woman, every man, and every child, and then burned the house to the ground.
Αυτό είναι που είναι πάλι σε επίπεδο ντοκιματέρ, έτσι.
Ναι. He considers justice to be a very basic right, a very basic mechanism for societies.
Well, in all democracies, there is a flexibility as the mores change, as there's that progress, whatever you want to call it. The mores change, so do the legislators try to respond to the changing needs of the society, and constantly, as Stafford said, little by little, there are changes. There are changes in the law. There are changes in the enforcement of the law.
I just want to give one example.
But that doesn't put an end to injustice, of course.
It doesn't.
There are new forms of justice. There are new forms of injustice cropping up.
I would like to say, talk about our special brand of truth and reconciliation that has taken place in Nigeria, which is really quite different from what happened in South Africa. And the sense of utter injustice felt collectively by the population. It was flawed right from the beginning. We didn't have, for example, all those millions of small acts, all those respect for the dead. It was imposed right from the beginning from above. Of course, it came in response to the hellish violence and unbridled violence that took place in Algeria in the 90s. So the people in power thought it was high time to stop it. Then they just, I would say, they set up a law called National Reconciliation.
I see.
Yes, but quite different from what was happening in South Africa. Nothing of public repentance or meetings between victims and torturers and tortured, nothing of the sort. It was by law, national reconciliation by law. And sorry? Exactly. And then
What did the law say, require?
Well, in the main, it meant some sort of decommissioning, like what happened in England with the IRA. So people who are up on the mountains with the extremists could regain their place in society by just giving away their arms.
Really.
Yeah, it's an amnesty, yes, but without memory.
Amnesia.
Yeah, with amnesia.
Yes, amnesia.
Amnesty with amnesia. And of course, up to now, people are reacting against that. Because there is no recognition, no acknowledgement of all what happened to the country and all to the suffering inflicted to the victims and the thousands of people who died and assassinated and killed with the cruelty, barbaric cruelty. During this whole period of the 90s, developed a literature called literature of the urgency, literature d'urgence. Really, we had almost more than 80 or 90 new names, people bearing testimony to what was happening in Algeria. This is really, writers, I must say, documented the violence with all their arts and hearts and minds. So, from the part of writers and also, I must say, journalists, there is a memory, there is no amnesia. In a sense, they were saying that you cannot have amnesty without real repentance. And at a broader level, you could see the same of colonization. Why does France refuse to repent? It's exactly the same thing.
Seconde guerre. Dans les rues, les jeunes défiaient le pouvoir. Ils lui jetaient à la face leur misère, leur vie sans perspective. Une répression sanglante.
But our Burmese people value justice in their unjust nation. Most Burmese accept the fact that every action has the reaction which reflects it. So each and every of us has different experience about justice and injustice. So let me move to my own experience in prison. I was in prison in 1993 to 20 years imprisonment, but I was released after 5 years and 6 months. So I have several personal experience of injustice in my own prison's life. So let me tell about what's going on inside. We were at the very small compound, and there is altogether only 6 cells in that, and altogether 6 people in that compound. 3 of them were charged with death sentence because they killed someone during the 1988 movement, and the other 2 were communists. So you can imagine my surrounding was not very good for doing meditation, which is the practice most Burmese doing for the benefit of the present and the future lives. So, and that our compound was inside the big ward, which was not for the ones who were sentenced already, but on the detention. So every 2 weeks, we could meet our family members for 15 minutes. So every time we meet our family member, we had to pass through the whole compound, through the wards. So at that time, what I noticed, mostly the detentions one and the criminals were treated very badly. And then, according to Buddha's teaching, we really concerned about the effects of the previous misdeeds. So at that time I was thinking, oh, they were very badly treated because of their previous misdeeds. That might be not the far previous lives, maybe just of their past wrongdoing in that very recent life. So anyhow, I was really worried about I could be treated very badly if I don't do anything else to overcome, to terminate the eternal life cycles. So that's why I decided to do meditation. That's part of my way to show how one can be just in that unjust world. After 20 hours per day meditation for around about 2 months, and I still keep going with the regular meditation, I was changed. And then what I was thinking is that in 20 years' time, I will be released by those who have the keys to the door of the world, and they are the owners of my freedom. But if I meditate, it's me who has the keys. I need to meditate all my past misdeeds and to conquer their effects in the future life. My real fear is of a life cycle, not be born again, not to die again. Once you meditate upon that first fear, you get the right perspective on what is your task inside the prison wall as well. And I got several problems with the authority. They treated me very unjust, and I wanted to show the other political prisoners and guards as well to what extent one can be just and practice law. Also, I'm thinking my resistance in the prison won't be nothing, because as long as I'm in prison, the military government, they cannot be at ease. I never felt I'm the victim. Even though I was a prisoner, I never felt under authority. My premise is that nobody could hurt me. The one who can hurt me is only me. That's why I try not to betray myself. I'm the one who is responsible for my thoughts and deeds. That is why I always try to do the right things, right thoughts, and I also try not to hurt anyone else, including the guards and the officers, just to protect myself from being hurt.
The man who gave my father away to the Nazis to execute was never punished.
Would you have
He kept being on the side of the winners.
Do you wish 40 years later, 50 years later, that he would have been? And what kind of justice would you want?
I remember that myself and his kids, we were doing war with stones.
Yeah.
You were playing together.
the guy remained on the side of the winners of the war.
I understand that. I'm asking a question. Do you wish that, what form of punishment would you have wished for him?
I think for the understanding that what he did was criminal and wrong, and that he understood that, and everybody else who hadn't understood it so far to understand it. And because 50 years have gone away, 60 years have gone away, the crime is no longer valid for him to go to jail to be punished. The only thing that I wish is that the understanding and the acceptance that what he did was criminal, wrong.
Clearly,
but wouldn't you say that in some ways that's what you've been writing about all these years, haven't you?
I suppose there are a number of themes that I've been tumbling, and I'm working them, and I'm writing them this way, and I'm writing them that way, and this is why I have written a trilogy, essentially, 3 novels about the Second World War and the Greek Civil War that followed it, trying to exhaust that material, and it's inexhaustible.
I read this thing in the paper yesterday. A couple in Atlanta, Georgia, vegans, were sentenced to life in prison because their baby died for malnutrition. And it just came to mind because I'm thinking, why are they being punished? In the sense, they killed their baby through negligence, and the emotional punishment is enough. They will never recover. And
the emotional punishment for what?
They are vegans. And their child died.
They didn't feed the child enough.
But who was punished emotionally? If they didn't feed the child.
Can I finish? And I think we can argue about whether they should be in prison or whether they're never going to be okay. They're going to suffer with what they did forever. And the question is, societies punish people not necessarily to get anything out of the people who committed the crime or this negligence, but to hold them as an example, to teach a lesson to everyone else. You can't do this. This is wrong. So we put the morons who couldn't feed their own baby in prison for life, not for their benefit or to punish them, but just to hold them up as an example for everyone else. And it strikes me that there's individual justice we've been talking about. There's also the kind of systems that societies create, and they have nothing to do really with what maybe we've been talking about. Kind of justice that demands an individual sacrifice, almost a heroic person saying, no, I don't want retribution, the justice and injustice stops here, I will not seek more. But societies can't function that way. On a larger level, we create systems that we can't demand of individuals to be heroic. In a functional society, we create rules so that we don't need people to be heroic, so that the state steps in and says, no, that's wrong, period.
But respect us.
One good thing that came after the South African situation, I don't know if maybe you know more than me about this, but they now have the best legal system in the whole world. I don't know if that's correct or not. But
it's actually, unfortunately, a very, very damaged legal system because, and we might want to talk about this later in terms of criminal justice as opposed to constitutional justice. We have to separate those two in South Africa because criminal justice there is a mess. More people die in prison today than died during the apartheid years, which is a shocking thing to realize. In terms of a larger constitutional justice that addresses society as a progression, it's the most
because
extraordinary.
in most countries the system is like this vertical. You commit a crime against the state. That's why these people, they don't care whether they are repentant or not. When you commit a crime, it's against the state, so you have to be punished. But the new system in South Africa is also you commit a crime against the person, so they address it both horizontally and vertically. So
it comes back also to that, the very issue of mores, but several things about that is the question of do we begin with injury? And what I loved about the Michael Longley poem that you have is that it's trying to move past injury. And so much of our justice system and our responses are based on this notion of injury, which then allows the state, and this allows George Bush to bomb Iraq, even though it has nothing to do with the injuries. If you begin with the injury, then response of kinds that produce more injustice are very possible. If you,
it seems like the kind of human grounded in this world, this kind of system of justice make allowance. Of course, it begins with injury. Because that's what people feel. That's it's very possible that the man who ratted out Stratus's father did feel exactly what Stratus asked for in his definition of justice. It's possible that he did, recognize that he had done something terrible that had effects on people's lives. But that's kind of, poetic moral justice. We have no proof of it, and so the system demands proof of that. And so the proof is temporal, it's tangible, you can touch it, prison, or X, Y, Z. And so that the injury has an effect that we can see, and that way the society feels like its hunger is slaked somehow. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just saying that it functions this way because people are not superheroes. One of the ways my thinking has evolved just being here for 3 days, one in particular, I was interested in the way, everyone came at it from a particular history with a particular perspective. Like, Tony kept talking about South Africa, and I talked about Peru, and Muhammad talked about Algeria. And one of the things that I think I didn't bring up in the actual conversation, an idea of justice that trumps all of that. Like we could talk about Palestine and Israel forever, but when there's no more water, it's completely ludicrous, right? The kind of environmental apocalypse that awaits us makes all of our talk about justice seem really, really petty and small. And, the good guys and the bad guys are both going to not be able to feed themselves. I feel like somehow I didn't get to bring that up, but it's something that, when Mohammed was telling me about how cell phones are killing bees, and there's not going to be more bees in the world, and then what's going to happen to the food supply. I started thinking that was kind of like the elephant in the room we didn't get to talk about. So I guess that would be, since everyone on a certain, especially if you believe, beginning from the Buddhist idea that everyone has been an infinite number of lives, everyone has been the perpetrator of great crimes and the victim of great crimes. In that sense, the only justice would be the atom bomb, to destroy everything. I guess, the environmental disaster that is coming will be the atom bomb. It will make the atom bomb seem petty and small.
Well, coming from, my background, from my tradition, the African background, there's a tradition of writers being activists. It's not like mutually, exclusive things. You can become a writer and also an activist at the same time. In fact, sometimes it's necessary, because writing, I see it as being for the future generations. I don't see writing, having an immediate effect on people. It doesn't, there's no immediate fruition to our desires, as writers. As a writer, you are supposed to educate the people and to kind of tell them what's going on around them, to make them think. And this takes time. It takes maybe a whole generation before people actually begin to, kind of internalize these things and to understand. So I see like the best thing to do is the combination of the two. And I'm talking, to go back to the African situation, there are writers who did that, who are doing that. People like the Nigerian Nobel laureate, Wole Soyinka. This guy is over 70 years old, but he's still carrying placards on the streets of Lagos and getting arrested. He won the Nobel Prize. He's written books, but he finds it necessary to step out. Because there's so much injustice around you, you feel the need sometimes to throw down your pen and just go out on the streets. But having done that, you still need to go back and write, in a kind of more collected, more reflective way for the future generations. And it's sort of documentation. You want to document the injustices being done, to name names for posterity to see, these people did these things. You can do it in fiction. You can do it in essays. You can do it in newspaper, in journalism. So there are so many ways of being a writer. It's not just poetry and fiction.
The question of justice, it seems to me, is the question of avoidable suffering. Some parts of suffering in a human life or an animal's life can't be escaped, and those can't be protested in terms of justice, only of science. If a child's cancer is caused by a factory's toxic waste, we of course feel it unjust, and we can go to a court of law, both for financial remedy and to prevent future suffering of the same kind. If the child's cancer is natural, however much we feel this unjust, the heart's quarrel isn't with anything subject to law. Basic sanity demands of us that we recognize what is remediable, if not for ourselves, then for others, and what isn't. Sanity demands also that we learn how to seek remedy in ways that are effective rather than ways that will almost inevitably cause more damage. In this, our allegiance needs to transcend what's narrow and turn towards the whole. Partisanship can only serve the partial. But I feel increasingly that even remedy is the wrong word. There can be healing, but no full cure. The broken bone will always ache in the rain. What justice can attempt is to restore function, to restore what wholeness it can, and to remove the thorn of bitterness that causes Auden's predictive line to reawaken. Those to whom evil is done will do evil in return. Real justice is always invisible. It happens in the time of before, not of after. It is subtle, supple, and soft of heart. It doesn't know slogans. The effect of these days of conversation on me has been, perhaps surprisingly, an increase of grief. I've grown less optimistic and more sad. This isn't, though, a bad thing. When the arrogance of certainty loosens its grip, we loosen ours. Life is fragile, small, perennially vulnerable, and wants to be held softly. The statue, I think, is blindfolded, so we cannot see it is weeping. The scales tremble in its hand, and that is what we call balance.